Welcome to Smoogley TV. On January 18th, Tucker Carlson aired a segment on his show where he made numerous claims regarding homelessness, addiction, and crime in general. This is something that Carlson does on a regular basis, and since I happen to know a lot about this particular subject he's covering, I decided to fashion some rebuttals in response to this. As always, it's important to be aware of your biases when assessing the merit of an argument. I've never really liked Tucker Carlson or his show, but I'm willing to look past that bias to determine whether anything he's actually saying is true or has merit. Let's get into it.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We want to begin by noting something obvious because this is the obvious show. If you live in the United States, you may have noticed that many of our public spaces have become permanent homeless encampments. You see trash-filled tents blotting out what were once green and tidy public parks. You step over vagrants drooling unconscious on the steps of train stations on the way to work. You watch as junkies smoke meth without any embarrassment at all and then yell at pedestrians on the sidewalk, maybe at your children. Everywhere, at every intersection, there are beggars. It's what we used to imagine India was like, but this is not Calcutta. This is New York and San Francisco and Austin, Texas. So the question is, what happened? And the short answer is, our leaders did this. No matter what they tell you, homelessness is not an act of God. It's not the result of economic collapse in this country. America did not run out of housing. Instead, a determined group of well-funded ideologues decided to make it easier to live on the streets in this country while doing drugs.
Carlson seems to think that the ease in which people can do drugs on the street has anything to do with how many drugs are done on the streets, or anywhere else for that matter. If people aren't doing drugs on the streets, they're going to do drugs elsewhere. This is a very common conservative rhetoric. They use the same exact argument on abortion regularly, and it was the primary argument for the archaic and immoral abortion law that was recently implemented in Texas. Let's continue on.
In 2018, the court declared that cities have no right to criminalize homelessness. In fact, the court ruled cities have an obligation to provide free housing to the homeless at public expense. The Supreme Court later upheld that ruling. The case was known as Martin versus Boise, and it had exactly the effect that Latham and Watkins intended. City officials across the country no longer had an obligation to protect the public and public spaces from drug addicts who decided to live in them.
A handful of Seattle's more than 12,000 homeless will soon be going from the street to a new apartment with stunning views of the Space Needle and Puget Sound. Using part of its share of the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, the city bought 3 brand new apartment buildings for $50 million for 165 homeless, a price of $300,000 per unit. In Los Angeles, Skid Row is about to get a new neighbor, a 19-story high-rise for homeless, costing taxpayers $160 million or $580,000 per unit. They're part of an expensive push to get the homeless off of sidewalks and out of city parks and into government-subsidized housing, even if it means buying new buildings at market rate from developers.
Oh, stunning views of the Space Needle in Puget Sound. Do you have one of those? Well, crackheads do. More than $500,000 per apartment to house drug addicts at public expense. At market rates.
I find it kind of interesting that when regulations require that houses be built to a humane standard for housing the homeless, which costs a lot of money, he resorts to the crabs in a bucket technique, which is what he continues with here. Let's watch.
So the city's priorities could not be clearer than that. You lavish money on the least productive, most antisocial parasites in our society, and then you punish Americans who work for a living. Got it?
The crabs in a bucket technique for agitation propaganda, or agitprop, is where the propagandist tries to get the concerned citizen to think they're being wronged in some way by the subject they're focusing on. So when Carlson talks about crackheads getting beautiful views of Seattle, he's really just showing the glaring problem of the housing market inflation, which is a whole other complicated subject in and of itself. The reason these programs are expensive is because when you build new buildings as opposed to renovating older ones, you must build it to a much higher standard of construction, which costs a lot of money. This is basic safety, humanity, being humane. He's essentially complaining that buildings are expensive because it's on the American taxpayer. Let's continue.
In Austin, Texas, the city's budget for homelessness assistance was $68 million last year. At the very same time, the city of Austin spent just $3.5 million in new loans for struggling small businesses, and only $7 million for, quote, mission-critical infrastructure and deferred maintenance at city facilities, like the things that matter. And at the same time as this was going on, the police department in the city of Austin got an $11 million budget cut. So what happened to the homelessness in Austin, the problem they were trying to, quote, solve? Well, to no one's surprise, it has grown by 10% in just 2 years. You get what you pay for. When you pay for homelessness, you get a lot more of it. See how that works?
Just going to make a quick note on that. Notice he said, in 2 years. I wonder if there's been, I don't know, kind of a crisis going on these past couple years. I don't know. It's been a really long 2 years, but like maybe it's something to do with that and not anything to do with the policies that were implemented. I don't know. Just throwing something out there. Let's continue.
Focusing our attention and our money on people who contribute nothing, who only detract from the project that is this country, don't help their communities or anybody's community, who hurt other people, who live solely for themselves, who are a danger to the rest of us, that's insane.
Just a quick comment here. It's a little bit interesting that he mentions people endangering other people, because that's essentially what he's doing. In a country that is highly susceptible to tribalism, he is painting homeless people to be essentially a subclass and even un-American. That's dangerous to people who are Americans. So I'm just saying it's a little bit weird that he would be talking about homeless people causing danger to other people when, hold on, those are also Americans and we should be helping them. Let's continue.
So where's all this money going specifically? Now, we could do 5 hours on this, but here's just one example. That money is going to an overdose prevention center, preventing overdoses, which in fact means helping the homeless get high.
Officially called an overdose prevention center, it's a place where users can snort, smoke, swallow, or inject illegal drugs in a controlled environment. 2 centers in East Harlem and Washington Heights are the first in the nation to allow supervised drug use. The head of an East Harlem community organization says the facility and a nearby methadone clinic have led to an unwanted influx of addicts.
They all come here from different areas of the city. We never had this around here. No matter how bad it was through the 60s, all of that, we never had this around here.
It's pretty funny watching people look confused as they see this. What's going on here? I don't remember this. But it's not complicated at all. It couldn't be simpler. Politicians are making it much easier to be a homeless drug addict in the United States and much harder to be a law-abiding member of the middle class.
He fails to mention a lot of extremely important details in his complaints, which is why this highly popular TV show is dangerous to our country. We aren't just talking sides here. What we're talking about is fallacy. Fallacies are universal, and all walks and ideologies use them. This is just one of many that Carlson uses on a regular basis. The straw man. Drug addiction and homelessness are complicated subjects to both study and understand, and better yet, understand it enough that you can suggest public policy regarding that subject. Since Tucker can't encompass that level of detail in a short time slot, he resorts to oversimplifying the problem to make it easier to attack. Let's finish up the segment and I'll throw you some facts.
And the solution is as simple as the problem. Here's the solution. Stop putting up with it. Say no. No, you can't smoke meth in the park. You're not allowed to crap on the sidewalk. Pull up your pants and get the hell out of here. Go somewhere with lower standards. Head for a place where politicians don't care about their people, because we do care. And that's why we're hauling your tent to a landfill and cutting off your checks today. You are a drug addict. Get a job or leave. This is our city. You are not allowed to wreck it. You didn't build it. You know, that's not hard. That works. We know it works because that's how societies function for about 2,000 years. If you're an unmarried man with no job, you were not allowed to destroy things. It wasn't your right. And by the way, this is how successful families still operate to this day in the privacy of their own homes when the NGOs aren't watching. Parents reward good behavior, and they do not tolerate bad behavior. Why? Because if you let your kids smoke weed at the breakfast table, they will. So you don't let them. So why not apply the same standard to the drug addicts at Penn Station? Because what we're doing now isn't compassionate, it's an attack on civilization.
Just to bring up a few things Tucker fails to mention in this entire episode, he fails to mention anything regarding the mental health crisis in America. Not only that, but he also completely glosses over the fact that over the past 50 years, our country has deinstitutionalized people with mental illness and have left for-profit hospitals to pick up the pieces. Where did all these people with severe mental illness end up? On the streets and in our prisons, many of which are also for-profit ventures. Who pays for those for-profit prisons? The American people. Another interesting anecdote to add is that according to drugabuse.gov, and I quote, many individuals who develop substance use disorders, or SUDs, are also diagnosed with mental disorders and vice versa. Multiple national population surveys have found that about half of those who experience a mental illness during their lives will also experience a substance use disorder and vice versa. Although there are fewer studies on comorbidity among youth, research suggests that adolescents with substance use disorders also have high rates of co-occurring mental illness. Over 60% of adolescents in community-based substance use disorder treatment programs also meet diagnostic criteria for another mental illness. Data show rates of comorbid substance use disorders and anxiety disorders, which include generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Substance use disorders also co-occur at high prevalence with mental disorders, such as depression and bipolar disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, psychotic illness, borderline personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. Patients with schizophrenia have higher rates of alcohol, tobacco, and drug use disorders than the general population. The overlap is especially pronounced with serious mental illness. Mental illness among people ages 18 and older is defined at the federal level as having at any time during the past year a diagnosable mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder that causes serious functional impairment that substantially interferes with or limits one or more major life activities. Serious mental illnesses include major depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder, and other mental disorders that cause serious impairment. Around 1 in 4 individuals with serious mental illness also have an SUD. So this just brings me to my final few points here. So when it comes to the housing crisis, in Tucker's mind, really all he's upset about is that it costs a lot of money to build houses, and you know what? We just don't want homeless people or crack addicts or whatever he wants to call it to have a decent place to live in. And then additionally, just even further on, the drug crisis in America or whatever, he really just wants to frame that as, hey, everybody's just having a great time and addiction is just a grand old time for these people and they're just getting on by, and we're not doing anything to fix the issue. That's not the case. If he was really concerned about the homeless problem, he would be immediately looking to things like mental illness and seeing, hey, wait a minute, did we deinstitutionalize the mentally ill within your lifetime? Yeah, we definitely did that. So I'm just saying that really all he wants to do is complain, and then the solution that he gives is just the most tribalistic, like there's no dog whistle anymore. Like he is just saying straight up, he no longer considers these people to be Americans. And I'm sure, hey, some of them might be immigrants, so that's a fair point. But the point is like they still reside within our country, and we have a moral obligation for these people, just like we would have with any other American. So if there's data and scientific studies that we can use to try to make sense of it all so that we can better help these people, why would we not use that? Why would we not go with the compassionate response? We have plenty of money. So what I want to say very clearly and very plainly is, the problem is not the homeless people. The problem is the institutions that put those people out on the streets. That's the problem, Tucker Carlson. You are focusing on the wrong thing. You need to seriously read some studies. And I'm just saying, I know that he's not going to, because he's a propagandist and he's saying these things for a specific purpose, to fulfill the needs of some very specific people. Just these few points, backed by actual data, completely smash Tucker Carlson's argument. But we face a much more sinister problem yet. How long did it take for me to refute what he encompassed in a 15-minute segment? I had to cut out a lot of his repeated arguments, and I'm still going to be over 11 or 12 minutes of video time just to refute it. I had to actually look up and read the studies and articles in the description below, which took a bunch of my free time. I looked up an opposing study on both subjects, which I didn't feel held water since it was just extremely old and not using accurate data for their analyses. While I may care about solving the issue of right-wing propaganda, I'm also fully aware of the task ahead of us in fighting it. As I mentioned before, all the resources I used to make this video are in the description below. If this is content that you like, please consider subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching.